anything else, our Board of Trustees of Historic Hopewell voted to dedicate this year's season in memory of Ann Robbins. Ann did this for year after year after year. So she started this year. I talked to her probably a month before she died, and she was, said, I've got this lined up and that lined up. So we really want to thank Ann and her family. Of course, the family tradition seems to be continuing on since Susan Glades, her daughter, has taken over for Ann's stead. So thank you, Susan, very, very much. But a few other things I'd like to say about, hope everybody got this. Has a list of our future speakers. They all sound very interesting. I have it from an informed source that Jeannie is going to show us a couple of the moves.
I didn't put on my face.
And now, I would like to introduce the person who is most responsible right now to making sure this occurs, Susan Glades.
Gosh, I never thought I would be doing this. And I spent the morning praying about how I was going to get through this first time without my mom. So I apologize for this. But she loved this program, and she dedicated so much of her time and energy toward it. And when she passed away, I thought I have to do something for her, and this is it. So please forgive me. Anyway, you're stuck with me, and I'm going to do my very best to honor her and do this right. So get myself together. We are so very fortunate to have Jeannie Langford, and if you've been to these before, if you're new, you're in for a big, big treat. Jeannie is, I'll read her bio first. Jeannie Langford was born in Narrows, Virginia, and has lived in Hopewell since the age of 3. She graduated from Hopewell High School in 1974 and attended the College of William and Mary, where she focused her studies on history. Jeannie is employed by the Appomattox Regional Library System. She's an assistant librarian and the archivist for the Ann K. and Preston H. Leake Local History and Genealogy Room. Ms. Langford is certified in museum management, having graduated on March 11, 2013 from the Virginia Museum Association's program. She's currently pursuing an advanced certificate in collection care through the Virginia Association of Museums. Ms. Langford resides in Hopewell with her daughter, her son-in-law, and 2 wonderful grandchildren, and she expects great things to come from the local history and genealogy room. So today, Jeannie's topic is the Summersaults, Pyramids, and High Flying, the exploits of the Tubize, Tumblers, and the Hopewell Flying Explorers. And many of you are familiar with the Tubize Tumblers, but I guarantee you're going to learn something new today. The Tubize Tumblers were the toast of Hopewell during the 1920s and the 1930s. This co-ed team was well known across the state of Virginia. The Flying Explorers also performed across the state and were even invited to the 1964 World's Fair in New York. So, I will turn it over to Jeannie.
Going up. Going up. Things look a whole lot different from up here. I've never known how to be tall. Well, it is so nice to see all of you, so many familiar faces, and y'all don't know how much I missed doing this last year. I've been doing this for like 22 years, and it was really, really odd. I'd like to begin with the Tubize Tumblers. They were mostly employees of Tubize, sometimes some of their children. They were sponsored by the Tubize Athletic Association. A family could pay 7 cents a month, and they could participate in anything from tumbling to boxing to wrestling to track and field, baseball, basketball, and Tubize really included women in these athletic programs. The Tubize Tumblers were not really the high flyers. They were more tumblers, pyramid builders. They did occasionally use a trampoline. They were in existence from 1926 to 1934 when the Tubize plant closed and left. Some of the members, some of the names will be familiar to you, were Jimmy Murner, the late former mayor Marvin C. Neal, Reed Rickman, Joe Rickman, Earl Rickman, Bill Murner, Katie Futch, Juanita Paget, Francis Rickman, Louise Mifka, Virginia Jarvis, and Maud Franklin. They performed in parades. They also performed for special events. They didn't get to travel quite as much as later the Flying Explorers because it's the 20s and 30s. The roads weren't that great, but they did perform in Richmond. They performed in Petersburg, and they did make a trip to Rome, Georgia to perform at the Tubize plant in Rome, Georgia. The Richmond Brothers were probably the core of the team. They all served in World War II. In 1940, Reed Rickman won the state high diving championship, and he had planned to compete to go for the Olympics, but of course the war came along, and he enlisted with the rest of his brothers and went to World War II. In the 1950s, Joe and Reed Rickman started a gymnastics group called the Police and Fire Gymnastics Squad. That existed till sometime in the 60s, and they were quite influential. They used to call Joe Rickman Jumpin' Joe because apparently he was quite talented on a trampoline. But something even bigger and better than the Tubize Tumblers was being thought about. The Flying Explorers Post 936 was sponsored by the Wesley Methodist Church. It was the brainchild of John Talley, Ray Thomas, Ray Taunton, Bill Tiller, and Walter Tillington Jr. In May of 1958, they formed this post. It was a unique idea because apparently Mr. Thomas had been a gymnastics coach in Parkersburg, West Virginia, before he moved to Hopewell. There were other types of explorer posts that did things like flying airplanes and other things, but this one is the only one that I've been able to find so far that was solely centered around tumbling and gymnastics. The boys in this group were brought in an old-fashioned way. These men went around door to door in the neighborhoods recruiting these kids. The group size actually grew to about 30 children or young boys participating. Very quickly, they were able to purchase a bus, old 1952 Chevy school bus. The boys cleaned out the seats to make space to carry their equipment. They painted what the seats were left for them to sit on, and then Great Boy Hill Ford painted the bus bright blue, and Homer Lee Kraut, with the help of one of his relatives, painted the Flying Explorer emblem and the Hopewell Post 936 Flying Explorers on this bright blue bus. You may want to notice on this panel the emblem of the Flying Explorers. Each one of those was handmade by Miss Ida Roberts to go on the front of their uniforms. Excuse me. By 1961, these young people who were in a way kind of self-taught, because these men who had helped them couldn't necessarily swing on these rings or walk on a tightrope. So there was a lot of bumps, bruises, sprains, and relearning new things. And some of the boys even would get together and watch Ted Mack's Original Amateur Hour to get new ideas for new stunts. And then they'd work on them themselves. In 1961, they were invited to perform at the Scout-A-Rama at the State Fairgrounds in Richmond. This was quite an honor because this is a relatively new group. And they performed in front of thousands of people at the State Fairgrounds. 1962, the blue bus loaded up for a long, long trip. They had been invited to perform at the National Explorer Conference in Ann Arbor, Michigan, at the University of Michigan. At that event, Ted Keck won weightlifting, and Lonnie Thomas won in gymnastics. They performed as a team in a 4,700-seat theater. They were only one of 3 acts to receive a standing ovation. In the Hopewell News, it says the noise was so great in that theater that the theater itself was shaking and it could be heard outside. In 1964, the Flying Explorers were invited to perform at the Boy Scout Jamboree in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Only 5 units were invited to perform at this event. They raised the money for the trip and loaded up the bright blue bus, and off they went. There they would perform in front of 75,000 scouts and other guests. They received another standing ovation. They were so well received at this event that they were invited to perform at the 1964-65 World's Fair in New York. The Flying Explorers also swept the medals in the 1964 Explorer Olympics in Norfolk and were dominating the state in AAU meets. They also invited the VMI gymnastics team to come to Hopewell. That was the first gymnastics meet in Hopewell. Well, the VMI team came down and were soundly thrashed by the Flying Explorers, who were much younger and had not had a professional coach. So the boys began raising money. They were going to perform at the World's Fair in June of 1965. They sold light bulbs. They held dances and barbecues and events where they would bounce all day long. They continued to participate and compete, winning many titles. And that same year, in March, they asked Mr. Richard Hoagland if they could compete for the state title at the VHSL competition. Mr. Hoagland said, sure. The only thing was, only 4 of the boys were eligible to compete. But they were going. So they began their trip in the blue bus to Charlottesville. But unfortunately, the old blue bus broke a tie rod, so it was no good anymore. The boys camped overnight close to a cemetery to protect their equipment and other belongings in the bus, and then they got towed in a ride to Charlottesville, where they competed in the state championships. Well, they were competing against teams that had 20 or more competitors. They came in third place. Mickey Janosik won the state tumbling title, and Alan Blackman finished third on the trampoline. Quite accomplishment, considering what they were competing against. And when they came back from Charlottesville, they presented the trophy to Mr. Hoagland. Well, the loss of that bus was going to cause considerable problems to go to the World's Fair. They were going to have to get the money to get a charter bus, and that was going to be expensive, and they were also going to have a truck to haul all that equipment, because we had trampolines, parallel bars, side horses, mats, you name it, anything for a gymnastics event had to be taken with them, because they were not going to provide them with the equipment. So they began raising more money. They figured they needed about $2,500. Well, today, that would be roughly the equivalent of $21,000. People were given what they could. Businesses given $100. So when you think about it in inflationary terms, a business given $100, that was a lot of money. What the people of the community also did was they started having drop-off spots for non-perishable food. Like George's Drugstore was one of the drop-off points. And people would bring in non-perishable food for them to take with them to defray some of the costs, so they wouldn't have to be eating out. They eventually, by the time they got ready to leave for the World's Fair, had raised right around $1,800. So they were able to get a bus and a truck. They left on June the 10th. They were scheduled to perform from June the 12th through the 17th. They would be performing 5 shows a day for 6 days, for a total of 30 shows. In some cases in different venues than Scouting World. They did have some free time though, so they were able to get out and enjoy some of the sights and sounds and taste some of the food at the World's Fair. Unfortunately, the lack of transportation really hurt this program. If you can't haul around 30 kids and their equipment, you can't compete, you can't travel to other scouting events and raise all that money. So eventually, the post will be disbanded. In 1967, Mickey Janosik won the state championship in this gymnastics. And from there, he went on to compete at the national trials. Now this is a year that's right the year before the '68 Olympics. So Mickey went up there and he was competing against Olympians, big name club teams, and incredibly, against even all those odds, Mickey managed to finish 9th in the national trials, and I think that's an amazing accomplishment. These young people meant so much to this community. They brought great joy. They brought national acclaim to Hopewell. They were truly a treasure, and I'm honored today because I'm going to share the podium for a little while because we do have one flying explorer here with us. Mickey, would you like to join me? Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mickey Janosik.
You don't need the box.
No, I don't need a box. Thank y'all very much for coming. Who would have thought a bunch of kids would end up at the World's Fair? Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. We performed at the Reformatory, where we had a captive audience, of course. And we had a great time. The old bus we bought, I paid $150 for it at Coggins Junkyard, and we put $25 down and paid the rest whenever we could. Nick Mathis gave us the key to the community building to where we would work out. They had an old trampoline there, and they had a mat that covered the whole floor, and that thing was up there to roll up and take down every evening, but we really appreciated that. We needed to get our own trampoline, so John Homerkraut, he contacted Nissan Trampoline Company and to beg for help with a trampoline. And they asked us how much did we have, and he said $200. And he said, that's not gonna cut it, but let us see what we can do. A month later, we got a shipment for a brand new trampoline. So that was kind of cool. We were fortunate enough to have Ray Thomas, who was at that time was the plant manager at Allied Chemical. And being the plant manager, he had access to the shop there to where he would build us equipment. Our parallel bars weren't wood like everybody else's was. Ours was cold rolled steel, and it hurt when you wrecked on it. He got the bright idea one time that he was going to make a tightrope. So he strung a tightrope between two trees there on West Broad Street, and we learned how to do a tightrope. We had a long pole. We could stand up, sit down, and when you fell off that thing, it hurt. Then he came up with a bright idea where he saw this teeter-totter, which is about an 8-foot board on a pendulum. One person would get on the ladder and jump off on it while the other guy was on the other end. It would shoot you up in the air and you'd do a flip. Well, didn't know we should have started at the lower rung before we jumped off that ladder. And me being one of the flyers, they call that, I was on the other end. Well, when Monty jumped off onto the teeter board, I didn't know I was going to get such a jolt, so I did an immediate backflip and came up under it and busted my head open. That was fun. We quit doing that. And we really never had a whole lot of bad injuries. Only time we would get injured is when we would be after school, and we worked out every day after school. We come home, our lunch break would be run down to Mr. Thomas's, which was right behind the high school, and work out for an hour and then go back to school. The only time we really got hurt when we were doing stupid stuff like seeing how many backflips you could do. And of course, after about 10 or 15 of them, you lose where you're at, you're dizzy, and next thing you know, you're in a rose bush somewhere. But you know, we were also featured in Boys Life magazine, and the Explorer Olympics came around at Fort Lee, where there was an Explorer Olympics there, and so we went over there to compete in gymnastics and did pretty good there. I competed in diving. I really wasn't a diver, but I said, well, if you can do it on a trampoline, you can do it off a diving board. So I did that and I won first place there. And if you remember, we were in the Hopewell Christmas parade a lot. Norwood Wilson with Green Bay Construction Company gave us a flatbed truck, and we mounted a trampoline on the flatbed and a horizontal bar on it as well. And they always put us behind the horses. But anyway, we would get, as the truck would move down the road, we would be doing giant swings on the horizontal bar and jumping on the trampoline. But we had one guy sitting at the front of the truck that would tell us when a red light was coming. So he would stop us. We would break on the bar and go under the thing. And had a real good time with that kind of stuff. But I also went on to go to Richard Bland College, and I was their gymnastic team. And we had to meet with VMI and another meet with VMI and William and Mary, and Richard Bland College beat both of the teams together. I never had a whole lot of coaching. Again, we watched Ted Mack and Amateur Hour, read books, and just figure things out on our own. After the team broke up, I would go to George Wythe High School in Richmond every day after school and help those kids doing gymnastics, while their coach, a real coach, taught me, and that's when I went to the Nationals and competed there. But it was such an honor to be such a group. It kept me out of trouble. We never thought of drinking beer and raising heck and all that kind of stuff. We worked out all the time. And that was, we had a bunch of good buddies together, and most of us are still living. They were scattered all over the place. And what a great friendship we created. And we thank Hopewell for helping us out. My mom sent out letters to everybody, fraternities, sororities, Optimus, Kiwanis, you name it, and they came through and gave us money, and we really appreciate that. So she told me she was going to do this with the Flying Explorers, and asked me did I want to come. I said, you better believe it. and thank you so much for what you did for us. And
Wasn't that great? This is somebody who actually participated in it. Thank you all so much for coming. It's so good to be out and to be able to sing and talk and do the things that we've all been used to doing. And I appreciate it. And thank you once again. And if you have any questions or comments, I will be around for a little while. Thank you so much.